It started as an ordinary evening, the kind you don't expect to remember. I had been sorting through paperwork, debating whether I should renew the lease on my small apartment. My landlady had mentioned she wanted to talk, so I stopped by her place on the ground floor. I thought it would be quick, sign a paper, nod politely, and be on my way. But when she opened the door, something felt different. She stood there in a soft blouse, the kind that fell gently at the sleeves, and a quiet perfume drifted from her like the afterthought of a flower blooming late in the season. Her eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual, not with impatience but with an unspoken thought. "Come in," she said. Her voice carried that graceful calm she always had, but tonight there was something under it. Something I couldn't name. The room was warm, lit not by harsh bulbs but by the amber glow of a single lamp. Shadows softened the edges of the furniture, making the space feel smaller, closer. She gestured toward the table, where a bottle of wine sat open beside two glasses. That in itself was unusual. She was never the type to blur business with hospitality. I sat down, still half expecting her to pull out the lease agreement. But she didn't. Instead, she joined me, folding herself into the chair with a slow elegance. She looked at me, her hand resting lightly on the table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then, almost casually, she leaned forward, her fingers brushing against my sleeve as though to make sure I was really listening. Her touch was light, but enough to send a small current through me. "Forget the lease," she said softly. "Stay tonight instead." The words caught me off guard. My chest tightened with surprise, and the room seemed to grow quieter all at once. I tried to read her expression. Was she joking? Was this just an invitation to talk, to share a glass of wine? Or was there something more waiting behind her steady gaze? Her eyes didn't waver. They held mine in a way that felt both grounding and unsettling. I could see the confidence in her. She wasn't someone who stumbled over decisions, but there was a quiet vulnerability there too, like she was waiting to see if I'd pull away. I nodded slowly, unable to find words. The wine between us sat untouched for a moment longer, the faint scent of oak and fruit rising into the air. I became suddenly aware of the silence, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even the muffled patter of footsteps from the street outside. Everything ordinary faded against the weight of that invitation. I didn't know what tonight would mean. I only knew that my landlady, this woman I had respected from a distance, had just opened a door that wasn't about contracts or apartments at all. It was about something far more fragile, and far more dangerous. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I was ready to step through it. I followed her into the dining room, still carrying the weight of her invitation in my chest. I wasn't sure what she meant by "stay tonight," but as I stepped closer to the table, I realized she had already set the stage. 2 plates. 2 glasses. A meal that looked far too carefully prepared to be casual. The table wasn't dressed in anything fancy, no candles, no polished silverware, but there was a kind of quiet intimacy in the way it was arranged. A bowl of roasted vegetables, a loaf of bread sliced neatly on a wooden board, steam rising from a dish in the center that smelled of garlic and herbs. She moved gracefully, as though she'd done this 1,000 times, yet something about her movements felt deliberate tonight. Her blouse sleeves were rolled just enough to reveal her forearms, and I caught myself watching the way she carried the wine bottle, the way her hand tilted gently as she poured into my glass. "Hope you don't mind," she said, sitting opposite me. "I cooked too much for one person." Her voice was casual, but the way her eyes flicked up to meet mine, briefly, then away again, betrayed a quiet vulnerability. It wasn't just dinner. It was an invitation to share space with her, to see her not as a landlady, but as a woman. I nodded, smiling faintly. "It smells incredible." For a while, we ate in silence, the clink of cutlery and the soft hum of the lamp filling the space. My nerves buzzed with awareness of every detail, the way her hair brushed her shoulder when she leaned forward, the way her laugh slipped out unexpectedly when I made a small joke about my terrible cooking skills. She laughed, covering her mouth briefly with her hand, then shook her head. "I doubt you're that bad." "Trust me," I said, leaning back a little, "if you'd seen my last attempt at pasta, you'd understand." Her smile lingered, softer now. And as she reached for the bread basket, her knee brushed against mine beneath the table. It should have been nothing, an accident, a simple mistake. But neither of us moved right away. The warmth of that small contact spread through me, grounding me and at the same time setting every nerve on edge. I glanced at her, and she must have felt it too, because she hesitated for a fraction of a second before pulling her hand back, busying herself with her plate. The meal continued, but everything had shifted. Every glance, every pause between words, seemed to carry weight. I noticed her smile lasted longer when I spoke, and that she listened with a kind of attention most people rarely gave. By the time the plates were empty, it didn't feel like dinner with a landlady anymore. It felt like sitting across from someone who had quietly decided to let me see a side of her no one else got to see. And I realized, I didn't want the night to end. After dinner, she gathered the plates with a quiet efficiency, but when I stood to help, she shook her head gently. "Leave it," she said. "The dishes can wait." Her tone was firm, but not unkind. Almost as if she wanted to guard the moment we were in, to let it stretch without being broken by routine chores. She led me into the living room, and I followed, still unsure where the night was heading, but willing to let her set the pace. The living room felt different from the dining table, less formal, softer somehow. A tall lamp in the corner spilled a golden glow across the couch, making the space feel smaller, more contained, as though it belonged only to us. She gestured for me to sit, then eased down beside me, close enough that I could feel the faint brush of her sleeve. She poured us each another glass of wine, and then, instead of making small talk, she surprised me. "Do you ever wonder," she said, staring into the rim of her glass, "how quickly life can change? One day it feels full, and then suddenly it feels empty." Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, her gaze stayed fixed on the carpet, her fingers tracing the stem of the glass. I stayed quiet, giving her space. She took a slow breath, then finally met my eyes. When my husband passed, it felt like someone had pulled the ground from under me. I kept moving, kept doing what I had to do, but there were nights when the silence in this house was unbearable. Her words hung heavy between us. I felt a tightness in my chest, not just from her confession, but from the way she offered it so openly. She wasn't the polished, unshakable landlady in that moment. She was a woman letting me glimpse her most fragile truths. "I'm sorry," I said softly, and I meant it, not as pity, but as recognition of the courage it took for her to share. She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. It's been years. I'm not fragile anymore. But loneliness has a way of sneaking back in when you least expect it. Without thinking too much, I leaned forward, resting my hand lightly on her wrist. It was a simple gesture, nothing more, but her skin was warm under my palm, and the contact seemed to pause her thoughts. She glanced down at my hand, then back at me, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something but chose silence instead. A moment later, she laughed softly, shaking her head. Listen to me rambling. You didn't come here to hear about my old memories. But I held her gaze. Actually, I don't mind. I'd rather hear about your memories than anything else. For the first time that night, her smile softened into something more real, more unguarded. She squeezed my hand gently, just for a moment, before letting go. And in that simple exchange, I felt the entire night shift again. This wasn't just about dinner, or wine, or even loneliness. This was about two people who, in the quiet corners of a living room, had started to find a rare kind of closeness, one that words alone couldn't quite explain. The quiet between us lingered after her story, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt charged, like the air before a storm. She leaned back against the couch, her glass of wine balanced loosely in her hand, and I noticed the way the lamplight softened her features, the faint lines near her eyes, the curve of her smile, the calm steadiness she carried even in her most vulnerable moments. I should have looked away. But I didn't. Her eyes caught mine, and for the first time that evening, neither of us seemed in a hurry to glance aside. A warmth bloomed in my chest, steady and unsettling all at once. She broke the silence with a small laugh, though her voice was quieter than before. "You're staring," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I felt heat rise in my face, but I didn't deny it. "Maybe I am." Her hand paused at her temple, fingers brushing against her hair as though she'd forgotten the motion halfway through. The smallest tremor ran through her breath, but she quickly composed herself, lowering her gaze to her glass. The tension between us didn't dissolve, it deepened. I became acutely aware of everything, the faint perfume clinging to her blouse, the soft rustle of her skirt when she shifted, the way her knee rested just inches from mine. When she turned slightly toward me, the fabric brushed against my leg, and it felt like more than an accident. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, but the room had grown smaller, and every detail drew me back to her. "Do you ever wonder," she began, then stopped, her voice fading into hesitation. She let out a soft sigh, almost a laugh at herself. "Never mind." "No," I said gently. "Tell me." Her eyes lifted again, searching mine as if weighing whether I could be trusted with whatever thought she was holding back. For a moment, she looked years younger, uncertain, even shy. "I just wondered," she said finally, "if you realize how unusual this is. Me, sitting here with you like this. Letting someone in this close again." Her words tightened something in me. Because yes, I knew it was unusual. And yet, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I set my glass down, my fingers brushing against the wooden table with more care than needed, buying myself a second to steady my voice. "I do realize," I said quietly. "And I don't take it lightly." Her lips parted, as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she leaned back, her head tilting slightly as she studied me. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was a silence thick with meaning, with possibility. I found myself leaning too, just a fraction, just enough to close the space by an inch. It wasn't bold, it wasn't reckless. It was subtle. But in that single shift, the balance between us changed. Her eyes dropped briefly to my mouth, then flicked back up to meet mine. And in that fleeting glance, I knew, whatever was building between us, she felt it too. Part 5. The silence grew deeper, wrapping around us like a second skin. Neither of us moved for a long while, and yet everything about our bodies spoke louder than words ever could. I could hear the faint tick of a clock from the kitchen, the soft hum of the night beyond the walls, but all of it faded against the quiet rhythm of her breathing beside me. She set her wine glass down with care, as though it had suddenly become too heavy. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, but her fingers kept tracing invisible patterns against her own skin, restless, betraying what she didn't say aloud. "I don't admit this often," she said finally, her voice soft but steady, "but sometimes, this house feels too big. Too empty." She gave a small laugh, one that wasn't really a laugh at all. "It's funny, isn't it? A person can have everything in order on the outside and still feel a little hollow." Her words pulled at me. I turned slightly toward her, my knee brushing hers again, deliberate this time. She didn't move away. I reached out, slowly, carefully, and rested my hand over hers. The warmth of her skin spread instantly through my palm, grounding me, and for a moment she froze, her eyes fixed on the connection between us. Then she exhaled, long and quiet, as though the simple contact had let something inside her unwind. Her thumb shifted just barely, brushing against my knuckle. Such a small gesture, and yet it sent a current through me. My chest felt tight, not with nerves this time, but with the weight of what it meant, for her to let me in like this, for her to allow a touch so simple to carry so much. Without thinking too hard, I shifted closer, closing the small space that remained between us. She leaned, almost instinctively, until her shoulder touched my arm, and then, slowly, gently, her head found its way to my shoulder. The sensation was disarming. Her cheek rested against me with a delicate steadiness, her hair brushing softly against my jaw, carrying that faint perfume I'd noticed before. I could feel the quiet rhythm of her breath as it rose and fell, each exhale warm against my shirt. I let my arm slip around her shoulders, not to claim anything, not to take more than she offered, but simply to hold her there, to let her know she wasn't alone in that moment. She didn't resist. If anything, she leaned a little closer, her body relaxing against mine as though she had been waiting for someone to share the silence with. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The living room, the lamplight, the faint hum of the world outside, it all seemed to disappear into the steady closeness of her body against mine. And in that simple embrace, fragile yet certain, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about her loneliness, or my surprise at being let into her world. It was about the rare and quiet truth that sometimes, the most powerful connections don't need words at all, just the courage to stay still and let them exist. Part 6. Her weight against my shoulder felt natural, as though she had been there all along. But with that comfort came an ache, a quiet tug at the edges of my thoughts. The longer I held her, the stronger the question grew inside me, what happens if we let this go further? I shifted slightly, enough to see her face. She didn't move away, though her eyes opened, meeting mine with a calmness that seemed to conceal its own storm. "You're quiet," she whispered. I hesitated. "I'm just thinking." Her lips curved faintly, though not quite into a smile. "About what?" The question hung between us like a test. I could have lied, could have said something simple to break the tension, but the honesty in her gaze made me want to answer with the same honesty. "About this," I admitted softly. "About us. Whether it's something we should be stepping into, or something we should stop before it goes too far." Her breath caught, barely, but enough that I noticed. She looked down for a moment, her cheek brushing against my chest as she gathered her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried both strength and hesitation. "You're younger than me," she said. "And I'm not just any woman in your life. I'm your landlady." People would talk. They'd call it foolish, reckless, maybe even wrong. The word stung, though not because she was rejecting me, because I knew she was right. I had thought the same things, felt the same hesitations. Yet, as I held her, the reason seemed less important than the reality of her presence beside me. I drew a slow breath. Maybe they would. But right now, it doesn't feel wrong. That made her look up again. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the fragile kind of vulnerability that comes only when someone is on the edge of a choice. "Do you know what scares me most?" she asked. "It's not what people might say. It's that I'll let myself want this, want you, and then regret it when reality sets in." Her words twisted something deep in me. I wanted to reach for her, to promise her safety, but I also knew the weight of promises spoken too quickly. So instead, I spoke quietly, carefully. "I don't want you to regret anything. I don't want to rush, or take more than you're ready to give. But I also don't want to pretend there isn't something real here." Her hand, which had been resting on her lap, lifted slowly and brushed against my fingers. It was hesitant at first, then firmer, deliberate. "I don't want to pretend either," she whispered. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, no hum of appliances, no ticking of the clock, just her words settling between us like a truth we both already knew. We didn't kiss. We didn't cross the final line. But in that hesitation, in that choice to stay on the edge together, something stronger than certainty bound us. Because sometimes, it isn't the leap that defines you. It's the moment you both decide the ground beneath your feet is worth standing on, together.